I'm Aaron Cariotti. I'm a physician and director of the Bioethics and American Democracy program at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. For 15 years, I was director of the medical ethics program and a professor at the School of Medicine, the University of California, Irvine.
My name's Alethea Wieland. I'm president and COO of Clinical Research Strategies. We're a boutique contract research organization and executive management consultancy, over 35 years providing services to biotech, medtech, and the pharmaceutical companies.
Hi, I'm Peter Blaney. I'm the CEO of Induran Ventures. It's a general partnership that's focused on the creation of biotech companies.
I'm Concetta Dudley. I'm an attorney and bioethicist and adjunct professor with Johns Hopkins University.
I'm Jennifer Lahl. I'm the president of the Center for Bioethics and Culture. I'm Megan Murphy. I'm a writer and podcaster and the founder and editor of Feminist Current.
We're developing the foundational tools and knowledge in order to be able to engineer our biological systems, including potentially reconstituting life itself.
So the control of reproduction is a key feature of the transhumanist ideology through things like artificial wombs, through technologies we already see on the market like in vitro fertilization. Combining those things with gene editing, with other genetic technologies to, again, not only correct diseases or deficiencies in the human embryo, but to select for the kind of human embryo that we believe is optimal, and then even intervene on that to make it more than optimal, to make it, in some sense, more than human.
Assisted reproductive technologies allow us to make human embryos, human life in the laboratory. Sometimes you'll hear people talk about in vitro fertilization. In vitro means in the glass, in the test tube. So in the olden days, we had test tube babies, which we don't call them test tube babies anymore. But part of assisted reproductive technology is not only creating life in the lab, but we also have genetic testing. Pre-implantation genetic testing, where you test the embryos before they're even in the womb. So say a couple wants to design a baby and have a boy or have a girl, or they have a genetic disease in their family that they don't want to pass on to their children. They will test the embryos before they're even implanted. Does this embryo have Down syndrome? So there is an element of picking and choosing. When eggs come out of the woman's body in this assisted reproductive technology enterprise, the eggs are graded, just like when you go to the grocery store, they're grade A eggs. You know, we want the best eggs. The sperm is graded when it comes out of the man's body. You know, are these healthy sperm? Do they swim fast? Are they going to get to where they need to get to? And then once the embryos are made, the embryos are graded too. That's when the testing and the design element comes in. So all of this is about control. Controlling the kinds of babies that are going to be produced, the kind of babies that are going to be born. It's very expensive technology. So part of the lure is, you know, well, you'll get the baby that you want. You might be spending a lot of money, but you'll make sure you get a healthy, cute baby of your desire.
CRISPR is a little tool that's based on enzymes that snip the genome at particular places to remove genetic material, to insert new material in. It's basically like a little knife or a little pair of scissors that can snip and edit out chunks of the genome. As I said, the problem is that the genome is huge, even though it's very tiny. It's very complex, tiny, with millions of parts. And they're all folded over each other. And when you send in this little tool to make snips, you really have no idea what's going to be the end product.
CRISPR can certainly be used for evil purposes like eugenics. I consider something like CRISPR at a very early stage. And so it's been used on things like cell lines and that. And there has been some, albeit limited use, in humans. When CRISPR was first developed, you will have seen a lot of the bioethics communities and even the technical scientific communities coming out saying, we really shouldn't be doing certain types of things. We need to ban those kinds of things. And we saw those things going on in China. And in China, there seemed to be no rules about what these kinds of technologies can be used and how they can be used. And if these experiments go wrong, there seems to be no concern because from the perspective of in countries like China, humans are very dispensable.
The difficulty is when you just snip out the genes that cause a disease like sickle cell anemia, what else are you doing? What else is happening in here? In these immensely complex little structures? We don't know.
There's one thing, again, that the biotech industry has to do from a regulatory perspective is risk reduce anything that could possibly go wrong by the action of their gene editing. So in other words, by splicing and cutting and gene editing and things like that, they should understand what additional consequences to that action would be to a patient that would experience that new drug or biologic, for instance. We just don't know enough to understand that depth of eliminating future risk.
It's hard to hold back cures and solutions for problems, but I think it's incumbent upon us not to create worse problems while we're doing it.
When you think of CRISPR, I kind of go, ooh, Frankenstein's kind of stuff, It's all that, just Legos and building and creating. And I mean, the safety issues, are enough to keep me up at night.
A baby's not a thing. It's not a product.
This idea that I have a right to a child, I think, is one of the dehumanizing aspects of the transhumanist movement and some of the other social trends that have maybe contributed to the rise of the transhumanist movement. I think people have the right to attempt to have a child. I don't think they have the right to attempt to have a child by any means necessary, but certainly everyone has the right to attempt to have a child by the traditional ways of doing that. But that doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to get a child.
Should medicine be doing this? I say no. This is outside the bounds of medicine. Proper, good old, do no harm, Hippocratic Oath medicine. This is money-driven. I mean, fertility doctors are some of the most lucrative. I'm told that, like the head of fertility medicine at NYU makes more than the university president because it brings in all kinds of revenue, right? Most couples that are entering into the assisted reproductive technology superhighway, I call it, they're wealthy. This is very expensive technology. Again, has a high failure rate, so people who have to be in it with resources because they know the first time they try it, they're not probably going to have a baby, so they're going to have to try it again and again and again.
A lot of what they're trying to do isn't going to happen anyways because it's impossible. But do I think it's a good idea for us to really augment our genome? I'd recommend we try doing it on a little plant first and see what happens. And maybe in a couple of centuries, we will have learned enough to do something about it, to use it. But we're certainly not ready to today.
Yeah, I think women have been taught that they can escape nature, that that's part of their feminist birthright, is that now, you don't have to obey nature's rules because reproductive technology has solved that for you. So, it's not a convenient time for you to have a baby when you're in your 20s. You can just wait until it's convenient, until you're financially stable, until you've done what you've wanted to do in your career. And that's like a nice idea, but you can't. You actually don't have all the choices in the world. Your choices are limited by your body and your fertility and by time. And that's just the way that human beings work. And we can't theorize our way out of that.
this idea that a child is my right very quickly gets us to the point where we see the child as sort of my property and possession. If we're engaged in a quality control project, when we first create the child, and the child doesn't then meet our standards, how is that quality control project actually shaped our attitudes toward the child? How does this notion that I have a right to a child, come what may, and I can do it and make it happen any which way that I want, regardless of the consequences, how does that shape our attitudes towards the next generation, from being one of an unbidden, mysterious gift that we are given, that we have temporary sort of custodial care over, but that ultimately, this is a distinct human being that needs to live his or her own life, to, a project of my own making, a sort of project of my own creation. The right to the child attitude is fundamentally, I think, about control. The eugenics and the transhumanist movement are fundamentally about control. And when you start talking about controlling not just the lived environment through science and technology, but controlling and reshaping human nature, human life, human genesis, what you're really talking about at the end of the day is some human beings' control over other human beings. Right? There's no other way that we can exercise control over other people than by controlling other people. I argue that that's fundamentally a dehumanizing attitude that will lead to abuses and violations of human dignity, rather than to, a more enhanced or a more flourishing human society.
It's crazy. We're living in a brave new world.
There are things coming down the pipeline on the artificial intelligence front that are just going to make your hair stand on end. Elon Musk, he thinks that the world will be controlled by whoever produces the most functional AI system the fastest.
AI is far more dangerous than nukes. Far. So why do we have no regulatory oversight? This is insane.
Some of us are probably familiar with AI taken to a bad end. How many of us have utilized social media, posted something that doesn't fit nicely within the algorithm of whatever social media platform we're in, and all of a sudden we're censored or we're booted off simply because an algorithm says what you said is unacceptable?
I was kicked off of Twitter in 2018, really for questioning gender identity ideology. I was speaking truthfully and unapologetically about the truth. A woman is a female, a man can't become a woman. This is basic stuff that Twitter determined to be hate speech. What's a man, what's a woman, which is apparently nothing, According to Twitter, they never told me specifically what rule I broke. I know what tweets I was banned for, but they didn't tell me why those tweets were hateful. They weren't hateful, of course. But, that sent a message around the world that to say that a man is not a woman is hateful. And you can say, oh, it's just social media, Twitter's not real life, but it is.
AI is not necessarily indifferent to us because AI can be biased. It can absolutely be developed to see certain data as positive and other data as negative, dependent on who's doing the programming, what their views are of a given data set.
And I was reinstated after being banned for 4 years, which is maddening because of the reasons that I was banned for, again, because Twitter is determining that speaking the truth is hate speech. But also, I'm an independent writer and journalist. This is the only way that I can access my audience, an audience that I can connect with other writers, other journalists, with interviewees. How I can stay in touch with people, how I can share my work, and therefore how I can make a living. I'm not attached to an institution or a corporation. I don't have some other job. I don't have, private funders. I have subscribers and donors. This is straight up just from people who like my work and they think, oh, I'll give her $5. So it had a major impact on my work.
So technology, even though sometimes we don't want it, it's hard to be a family that has no cell phones. You know, it's hard to, you know, when everybody else, and how do you communicate with half the world when you know, you can't do instant messaging?
I really don't know what the goal is for people that are pushing virtual realities other than money, maybe power. What do I think is wrong with it? It disconnects people. It puts people in private worlds. Not good. You know, would it have been a good idea for Robinson Crusoe to have Meta? Would that have made things different for him? I don't know, but why are we doing it to everybody?
I think that what's behind this push to force us into virtual lives, into virtual reality, is control. If we exist online, everything we do can be tracked, and everything we do can be controlled. We can only access what we can access. If we're getting all of our news and information from a news feed, from Facebook, from Twitter or Facebook has control over the information that we can access. They have control over the news. I mean, we've seen how Twitter has controlled and shaped and dictated what constitutes a fact. They've determined what constitutes fake news, which is not necessarily fake news. It's just not the news that they want us to hear. What constitutes hate speech, what we're allowed to speak about. Again, what kinds of information we're allowed to access and share with others. What they dictate what science is. Trust the science. It's like, Twitter now controls what science is. I mean, maybe we'll see that change with Elon Musk, but that's what's happened. We've seen a huge increase in that in the past few years, but it's really concerning. Everyone should be concerned that a corporation is determining what information you have access to, what you're allowed to talk about, what kinds of words you're allowed to use. What constitutes science, what constitutes the truth? Why does big tech get to determine what is truth?
I sort of see this communistic parallel as like, this is true totalitarianism, and the technology and social media companies are all in on it. And they have our names, and we have these, you know, a Facebook account or something like that. These are pretty dangerous times.
Yeah, and people think that they have like so much autonomy in their choices, and it's all been fed to them.
There's so many voices out there that are saying the same thing, suppressing and censoring people who have a counterpoint. And so those types of people are oftentimes subject to ridicule and shaming and public shaming and delicensing. And how did it get there? This is Nazi Germany, 1930s all over again.
You know, it doesn't sound that bad, social ostracization, because you're not being jailed, you're not being killed, you're not being tortured. But social ostracization is a very, very cruel and effective form of punishment. We need people, we need our families, we need our communities, we need our friends, we need our jobs, we need our, political circles, whatever it is, our sports teams. These are things that bring meaning to our lives. Otherwise, what? We're at home in our apartment, swiping through dating apps, clicking away on the internet, plugged in virtual reality, in a fantasy world, on pills so that we don't get depressed.
You sort of need transparency and accountability. You must not suppress debate. And I think that the Constitution, as our founders had written it, over 200 years ago, they had the right start. They had the right recipe for what could blossom into that panacea, that opportunity for everyone to kind of flourish.
I don't know why it's become expected to expect that you agree with other people on every single one of their opinions. You know, like I can only work with, associate with, sit on a panel with, do an interview with somebody who sees the world in the exact same way I do. How boring. I mean, what a good way to learn nothing. To not be challenged, right? And that's what I think these people want. I don't think they want to be challenged. I don't know that they want to learn anything new. I think they want to be comfortable in the beliefs and ideologies that they already hold so that they don't have to feel uncomfortable, so that they don't have to change their beliefs, so that they don't have to, God forbid, change their mind and admit that they were wrong about something.
If it impedes direct interaction with other human beings, if it impedes the development of relationships, and that experience, that can't be good for people. That's not what we are. We're social creatures. So why do people find it attractive? It's a reality that they have some control over. They don't have to learn how to cope with the problems that they face. Life is not for cowards. It's difficult. And if you can escape from that reality, I can understand why people would want to escape. Should we make it impossible for them to do so? I don't believe that would be a good idea either. But we should certainly support people to give them an alternative, and the alternative, I would say, is reality.
I think that people don't know what freedom means. I think people don't understand what their rights are and why they have rights and why it's important to protect those rights. And you hear that from people who say things like, I support free speech, but not the free speech of racists, of misogynists, of bigots, as determined by me. So you don't support free speech. Free speech is for everybody. It's all free speech. It's even the speech that you don't like. That's the whole point.
I actually see that in the biotech world right now is this synthesis of wearables, the synthesis of tech, the synthesis of making us better, taking in all these data. The Facebooks and the Googles and the Amazon clouds, a lot of them own the data. So do the larger pharma and biotech companies do as well. Well, what if that data was used against people? What if those technologies became, so full of data that someone who had the wrong thought was actually penalized because of that?
If you don't comply and you don't agree to interact with the computer on an AI level, you don't get to go grocery shopping. You don't get to go out to dinner. There are a lot of things you're restricted from. Your movement is restricted. So we're beginning to see the kind of nefarious application of AI.
I mean, look at the way that people think about social media. They think it's a gift to them. Oh, it's just a service for me to use. These dating apps are just to help me find love. No, they're not. They specifically designed dating apps to function like a slot machine. So you keep hoping for the win, the match, right? And then you get those endorphins, and then they fall, and you have to keep swiping. Oh, I might find something better. I might find a bigger win. The whole point is to keep you on there and, of course, to collect your data. It's not for you. None of these things are for you, which is not to say that, social media cannot be useful to us. Obviously, it is useful to us. Obviously, I use these things for my work, but they don't exist for the good of humanity. That was not the main point of social media. Not as it exists now, certainly, not as it will exist in the future. The exist is still profit to collect data. And, probably worse things like to control access to information.
There was also a pretty famous Facebook leak recently of data. It was names of people who were, they had their phone numbers and their names leaked and things like that. And, that is of real concern, is when you're sharing that type of information.
Yet we do allow a lot of AI into our lives unfettered.
I think that they're so corrupt and they've propped themselves up around these lies. And they've used us to basically help build this digital prison.
I also think that the truth can only be suppressed for limited periods of time. A lot of the nonsense that we've been subjected to, the suppression of information and debate, it's all going to be temporary.